Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's web chat about the U.S. Mission Pakistan Cultural Affairs Section Annual Program Statement Notice of Funding Opportunity. Everyone listening should try to say that 5 times fast. It's a long title, but it's important, and we're excited to be on Facebook Live to share some information with you and to take your questions regarding this funding opportunity. I'm Mo, and I work in public affairs, and I'm here with my colleague, Francis.
Hello, everyone. I hope you'll be able to learn more about Nofos and important terminologies and our systems in today's Facebook Live session.
And without further delay, let's start our presentation.
So let's start with the basics. What is a Nofo? Nofo means Notice of Funding Opportunity. It's posted on Grantsgov and it's open to all interested organizations, whether they are registered in Pakistan or in the United States. The purpose for this Nofo is to fund projects that promote contributions to economic growth, develop human and government capacity, and develop strong ties between the people of Pakistan and the people in the United States. Of course, all of the details are in the Nofo.
So Francis, what does an interested applicant need to do to submit a proposal?
So in order to submit a proposal, the applicants need to follow the registration steps on the following website. Prior to applying for an application on grants.gov, all the applicants have to register themselves in several government systems. These systems are DUNS, NCAGE, and SAMS.gov. So the link that you see on the screen is where you start. This link will take you to grants.gov website that shows you how to get started. As I mentioned in my previous slide, that the applicants have to register in DUNS, NCAGE, and SAMS.gov, I would also like to mention that the applicants have to be really careful about how they enter their organization's information in the system, as well as on the online forms.
Right, because if there's an error and the systems do not have the exact same information in the field for the identification of information, the registration will not go through successfully. Now we're going to walk you through each of the required systems.
So, where to get the DUNS number? The link provided below will take you to DUNS and Bradstreet website.
And there's no requirement for applicants to register for these systems in any particular order, right?
Not exactly, but before registering with SAM, the applicants need to have DUNS and NCAGE number, so make sense to start with those two. You can register on these two systems simultaneously.
And for applicants who have previously registered, does DUNS send expiration reminders to grantees automatically?
Yes, to the emails that were used to register in the system. It is recommended an organization email be used instead of an employee email, because if the employee goes away, the organization will have to go through a validation process to update the email and gain access to the system. Yearly renewals are needed. Now we'll talk about NCAGE.
NCAGE is the NATO Commercial and Government Entity Code Number, which we call NCAGE for short. The code is a 5-character ID number, and it usually takes 4 to 5 business days for the registration process to complete. So for those of you applying for this grant, please apply soon.
So Mo, are NCAGE codes are mandatory for overseas recipients?
Yes, recipients located outside of the United States and its territories need to register for an NCAGE code. NCAGE codes are required to complete registration at sam.gov, which is why you need to start the NCAGE registration first. For domestic-based applicants, meaning those in the United States or its territories, they do not need an NCAGE code. That code will be automatically assigned to them during the sam.gov registration process. So now let's talk about the sam.gov registration. Francis, is sam.gov registration mandatory for overseas organizations?
Yes, the System for Award Management is the federal government's primary database for complying with Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. The Office of Management and Budget designated the System for Award Management as the central source to to facilitate applicants and recipients' use of a single public website that consolidates data on all federal financial assistance. This means all domestic overseas recipients must register.
So if a grantee let their registration expire, so it's inactive in the SAM.gov system, do they have to start from the beginning, or can they reactivate their registration?
Yes, they may update their expired registration, but will need their username and email account which they used when they registered. They can also use the help desk at sams.gov website. And finally, let's talk about grants.gov, the last step for registering with U.S. federal systems before applying for a grant.
Right. So when you start at grants.gov, you're able to look for any available grant opportunity. So that means that you can search for any grant offered by the U.S. government. In our case, of course, we're focused on Pakistan. So if you go to grants.gov and type Pakistan in the search field, you will see multiple opportunities, but particularly the annual program statement for cultural affairs. And as noted at the beginning, before you can create your grants.gov organization applicant username and password, you have to have an active SAM registration, which requires that DUNS and NCAGE number. So you can find all of this exciting information online and then successfully submit an application. So now let's get to the exciting part, how to share your creative proposals. This is a helpful list that we can see on screen of things to keep in mind when you're considering your proposal. Remember that this is a notice of funding opportunity for the public affairs section, specifically cultural affairs. It is not for USAID or another organization that's focused exclusively on development. We are interested in public diplomacy, and that means strengthening people-to-people ties, building the capacity of local civil society partners, media outreach, and countering violent extremism, as well as building an exchange of people-to-people ties through exchanges that have both Americans and Pakistanis participating. Specifically, we're interested in education, entrepreneurship, cultural heritage, and human rights, as outlined in the Nofo.
So preparing for the applications, all proposals have a narrative portion and a budget. The narrative and budget proposals should be in line with the Nofo. The key components, for example, monitoring plan in a narrative proposal or budget lines per USD approved categories, should be clearly reflected in the proposals. Template for budget is provided as an attachment with the Nofo.
So let's talk about that narrative proposal in a little more detail. While most of you surely know this, an executive summary should be short. It needs to convey the key components of the project quickly. It's basically the written version of your elevator speech. And if you can't clearly convey your project in 2 paragraphs, you probably need to reconsider the complexity of the project. Next slide. So here are some basic tips that apply to all narrative proposals. For this specific cultural affairs opportunity, we want to be sure that applicants can clearly explain the project they are proposing, which goals it will address, how that will be achieved, with what audience, and how the results will be measured. These are really the key elements. And remember that the proposal can be cross-cutting. While there are 4 program objectives and the narrative should clearly address one of them, it is certainly possible for a project proposal under, say, education to include an entrepreneurship element, and vice versa. But it should be clear from the narrative and the proposal what the primary program objective is and how it will be accomplished. And of course, the narrative plans should correspond to the proposed budget. So now back to Francis to talk about the organization description.
So it is important for the applicants to provide some background information about their organization and showcase their experiences managing grants. Strong track record plays an important role in the selection process. Therefore, we have included the organization survey along with the Nofo. If the applicants go to the announcement on grants.gov, under Related Documents tab, they will be able to find templates for application summary cover sheet, budget, organization survey, etc.
And while not all of those documents are required, they can be certainly helpful to strengthen your application. So now let's talk about project justification. We really can't overstate how important this section is. You have to explain clearly what you're going to do and why it matters to the U.S. government. It should specifically outline your plans, which should be directly connected to the project objectives in the Nofo. So this is where it gets more complicated. You'll want to look at pages 4 and 5 of the Nofo for the full description. But let's talk about this briefly. The first objective addressed in this Nofo is education, academic linkages. Proposals must aim to build enduring and self-sustaining connections between U.S. and Pakistani educational institutions and expand the knowledge and capacity of Pakistani institutions. This is a broad concept, but focused on building relationships between educational institutions and experts in both countries. As stated in the Nofo, it is desirable to have an in-person exchange component as well as an online technology component. That's because we see some of the greatest program impact from people-to-people connections, and if there's an online component, the audience reached will be much larger. While both are good, they are desirable, not required. For the second objective, entrepreneurship. Program proposals should promote sustainable enterprises, small businesses, and innovation in Pakistan through connections with U.S. partners, especially successful U.S. entrepreneurs. The options here are nearly endless, and you can easily research previous entrepreneurship programs sponsored by the U.S. mission in Pakistan to see what has worked before. That being said, we're looking for creativity and new ideas to reach these key objectives. Now let's talk about cultural heritage. Proposals should promote and preserve Pakistani cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, in collaboration with American experts, groups, and institutions. This could include the performing and visual arts, cultural sites, traditional handicrafts, sports, and other forms of artistic expression. This is a broad concept, and a proposal could address just one element of cultural heritage, or if appropriate, multiple. As always, the project should be reasonable and achievable. Let's talk about the final program objective, human rights. Proposals should increase knowledge and awareness of human rights with a focus on U.S. and Pakistani cooperation, specifically seeking to engage with local communities, increase human rights awareness, promote social opportunities, and encourage public visibility of these issues with programs that address awareness and advocacy over the short term, with an aim to change public perceptions and attitudes over the long term. Special consideration will be given to proposals that focus on girls' and women's rights, prevention of gender-based violence, disability rights, and issues of access, and issues affecting gender and sexual minority communities. Now over to Francis to talk about the timeline.
So, the narrative proposal must also include a time for the activities to be performed. Describe the sequence of activities, staffing, participants and their selection, state times when objectives will be met, presents a reasonable scope of activities that can be accomplished in project time and with the resources allocated. Similarly, it is important to provide a list of key personnel who will be involved in the implementation of the grant on a day-to-day basis. Have the right person with the right skill set needed for the role is always appreciated. It not only helps to accomplish the day-to-day tasks, but it also helps to achieve the objectives of the organization as a whole in a timely fashion. We will discuss about the key personnel in more detail in budget section slide. Also, if the primary applicant intends to work with subrecipients to accomplish a task or to acquire services, advice from the experts, the primary applicant must share their details in the application. Details such as name and background of the organization, what it does, around what time and under which activity their expertise will be required, their responsibility, etc. Most importantly, primary recipient is responsible for monitoring the work of subrecipient and their willingness to comply with USG regulations pertaining to grants. Additionally, letters of support should be included for subrecipients or other partners. The letters must identify the type of relationship to be entered into, formal or informal, the roles and responsibilities of each partner in relation to the proposed project activities, and the expected results of the partnership. So Mo, would you like to talk about sustainability component in the proposals?
Of course. We are very interested in providing grant funding to projects that will then have an element that is self-sustaining beyond the life of the grant. This shows an interest on the part of the applicant to continue the work and shows that the U.S. government is just one element in an otherwise successful program. While this cannot be guaranteed in advance, if there is a plan to solicit other funding in the future or grow the program beyond U.S. government funding, that is one indicator of a strong proposal. Now let's talk about how we define success. As you all likely know, the U.S. government is very interested in showing how funds were used and whether they were effective. A strong monitoring and evaluation plan that starts from the inception of a project is a strong indicator that the program implementers will be able to measure results throughout the project, which will then allow us to evaluate it. Every project proposal is different, and thus all monitoring and evaluation plans are unique. But there are many common elements. As you see on the slide, it is recommended to first define the indicators that will measure your success. As a simple example, if you were teaching a certain skill to a group of entrepreneurs and there was a common exam available to test those skills, an indicator could be whether or not those same entrepreneurs passed the test. A strategy for collecting that data would be to collect test results, as well as information from teachers. That could include surveys of the group participants, of their instructors, their employers, or anyone else influenced by the program. The key element is to have a specific plan that collects data that can be measured against a baseline to show what changed over time. Now we'll go back to Francis to talk about the budget.
So as I mentioned earlier, the template for budgets to be submitted with grant application is available on grants.gov. Applications with other budget templates will be considered ineligible. All budgets should be in US dollars. There are 9 approved budget categories for USD grants or cooperative agreements. It is not necessary to include all categories in your budget, as each one has its own definition and purpose. But it's important to provide narrative justification for each budget line or the cost category in the greatest possible detail. So we'll go one by one on the approved budget categories. The first one is personnel. It includes the salary of staff involved in the implementation of the grant. The applicant must mention the level of effort and the rate of pay of each of their staff, so the cost can be considered realistic and allowable. The second one is fringe benefits. It includes all the benefits, for example, Provident Fund, EOBI, health benefits, etc. The third category is for travel, which includes budget lines such as airfare, taxis, lodging, per approved USG rates. The fourth category is for supplies. It includes materials such as banners and small equipment like printers. It is important for our applicants to note that per USG rules and regulations, any tangible item that costs under $5,000 per unit are supplies and not equipment. Number 5 is equipment itself. Any tangible items that cost more than $5,000 are considered equipment. The sixth category for the budget is contractual. It includes cost for sub-grantees. Please note that a separate detailed budget is required from sub-grantees. Number 7 is construction. It's an approved category, but it is not allowable in public diplomacy awards, so it's not applicable to this Nofo. Number 8 is other direct cost. It includes costs like honorarium, printing, utilities, rents, etc. Number 9 is indirect cost. The applicants can charge indirect costs up to 10% of their total budget to U.S. Embassy, Islamabad. Also, if the applicants can share costs, it's a good sign. Sharing cost means that another organization or partner is contributing funds or staff or another in-kind service or product to support the program. It actually shows that applicant is willing to contribute to the problem which is being addressed by the grant. Again, applicants must provide as much detail as possible. so it's easier for the reviewing committee to understand how costs were constructed. The applicant must keep in mind that all costs are reasonable, allowable, and allocable.
So now we want to talk about eligibility and submission. And this actually gets to one of the questions directly from our viewing audience. Fatima Ghani asked whether all grants are for-profit organizations or for NGOs. And the answer is NGOs. Eligibility for this particular NOFO is only for nonprofit organizations. They must also be registered with the government of Pakistan, and they must have some experience in the area in which they are going to work. Particular to Pakistan, there is a requirement that U.S. and Pakistani organizations be registered with the Pakistani government. This is because organizations are required to provide that status in order to provide their programming. Therefore, organizations must provide proof of registration and nonprofit status with their proposal application. U.S.-based organizations should submit a copy of their IRS determination letter. Pakistan-based organizations would be submitting a copy of their certificate of registration from the appropriate government organization.
So Mo, do you think that the registration document is important?
Absolutely. As many of our applicants know, the NGO registration is required by law in Pakistan. We cannot issue a grant to an unregistered organization, as they would be unable to operate and complete the proposed program. For that reason, we need all applicants to include proof of NGO registration with their application.
Also, applications submitted via email will not be considered. Only grants submitted through Grants.gov will be considered.
So now let's move on to some of our questions and answers. So one question we've received is asking whether recipients who have reported that they received messages from companies charging $500 or more for the SAM.gov, DUNS, or NCAGE registration, is that legal, is the question.
So, recipients never have to pay to enter their own info into any of the systems. Some private companies offer to complete registration for other organizations for a fee. This is not necessary, but not illegal. Ads that seem like fraud may be reported at www.fsd.gov.
So what we're saying is that this is not an illegal practice, but is absolutely not required. There is no fee in order to apply to any of these systems yourself online. If you wish to purchase service support, you certainly can do so, but it is in no way required.
Also, we have also received a question about DUNS, NCAGE, and SAMS.gov if they send their expiration reminders to grantees automatically.
Right, and this is important for some of our applicants who may have either successfully or unsuccessfully attempted to apply for U.S. grant funding in the past. So if you had a previous registration, an email will be sent to the person who registered or to the email account that was registered in the system. It is automatic. Therefore, we recommend that organizations use a general email account for the organization rather than an individual employee email, because we've seen this happen where an employee leaves the company, the email address is no longer valid, and then the organization is unable to reactivate their account successfully.
Mm-hmm. Another question that we have received is, if a recipient is active in SAM.gov, does that automatically mean that their NCAGE and DUNS numbers are still active?
And the answer is no. They have to check each of those systems separately. And again, if users do not have their account information readily at hand, they can use the help desk option through either of those systems to get assistance in reactivating their accounts.
So our project proposal's second phase requires participants to travel to Afghanistan and India. Are these kind of costs or activities permissible in a grant or in a proposal?
Yes. Regional integration is a reasonable goal for a project proposal coming to Pakistan. There should be a convincing argument, a compelling rationale to support that travel cost in the project proposal. That being said, obviously we are here in Pakistan, and the general focus of applications should be on Pakistan as outlined in the Nofo.
Great.
Next question. This is we've received this one from multiple people, actually. Some people indicating that they haven't had quite enough time to apply for our Nofo. The closing date is April 28th, and they are asking for an extension. What's the answer, Francis?
Unfortunately, no. The budget cycle is very restrictive, which is why we are not planning an extension this year. So,
unfortunately, we're going to have to ask that everyone get their proposals in on time. So we thank you in advance for your cooperation.
This one's interesting. So, does a local university needs a dunce number in order to apply, or is that just for U.S. institutions, Mo?
Yes, and an NCAGE code and a SAM registration are also required, which are available via Grants.gov to start that application process, as we discussed at the beginning of this presentation.
Right. So, one more question. Does the exchange component need to be one-to-one? What if we have a visit to the United States, but participants from the United States cannot come to Pakistan?
So there is no rule that the exchange be one-to-one, meaning that there be an equal number of exchanges or an equal number of participants from Pakistan going to the United States and from the United States going to Pakistan. That being said, we do think there would be an advantage for proposals that contain elements going in both directions. So our next question. Does a project need to have a nationwide approach, or can we focus just on the underserved areas of KPK and Balochistan?
We are always looking for great ideas and capacity to implement them. Nationwide programs can be appropriate, as can regional geographical programs. Exact reach can be negotiated if the program is selected for funding.
So I think this question is important because it comes up in our Nofo as an area of interest. So this is one that qualifies as something that is an advantage but not required. And certainly, as we've noted, every program proposal is unique. So there are some program proposals where it would be appropriate to have an entire nationwide effort. In others, it would be clearly appropriate to focus on a specific region or area. The area of reach should be appropriate and compelling for the project proposal. Obviously, we have an interest in reaching areas of Pakistan and reaching as many areas as possible, but we don't expect every program proposal to reach every area.
Right, that's right. There's one more question, Mo. We want to apply for this grant in collaboration with the U.S. university. Is there any requirement that this proposal be submitted by them, or can we submit it? It will be a collaborative proposal.
And this is an important question as well, because there is only one primary applicant on any proposal. So that means that you, as the Pakistani partner, or the U.S. partner, can submit the proposal. It can be a partnership, but again, only one institution can submit the proposal and receive the award. We certainly welcome partners and plans for subgrantees, and the more detail that is provided in advance, the better. So the next question. Does the project have to be a partnership between a U.S. and a Pakistani organization?
So the project does not have to be a full partnership between a U.S. and Pakistani organization, but certain conditions must be met. Please see page 4 of the Nofo. It clearly mentions the details about it.
And here are some reminders of the programming that is going to be funded under this Nofo. Because again, we want to emphasize to everyone watching this presentation exactly what our focus is going to be as we evaluate these proposals. And we're looking first and foremost for programs that are going to strengthen ties between the United States and Pakistan through cultural programming. And obviously that programming should in turn highlight our shared values and encourage bilateral cooperation. The program should also include an American cultural element, or must include an American cultural element, or a connection with an American expert, organization, or institution. This is important because one of the key components of a cultural exchange program is the element of exchange, which means there has to be some U.S. element in every program. It's not enough to simply have a great idea for a Pakistani organization to service Pakistani students with purely Pakistani materials. While that might be a wonderful program, it's not one that would qualify for our funding because we require an American element.
So our partner organizations in the United States is submitting a project that shows our organization as a local partner. Are we eligible to send another proposal from our organization?
Absolutely. While one institution can submit a proposal and only one institution can receive the award, another institution could certainly be named as a partner. There could even be multiple institutions named as a partner. And then those institutions could in turn submit a different proposal under their name as the primary applicant and vice versa. All of that is fine. However, they would need to be for different programs. The same program should not be submitted twice. And our next question. Would a U.S. public university and the Punjab Higher Education Commission or institutions under its supervision be eligible to apply?
So U.S. public and private non-profit accredited universities are eligible to apply, as are Pakistani universities under the Punjab Higher Education Commission. So how are the award amounts dispersed when the grant is approved? Is it done as a lump sum payment or will it be dispersed in parts? That's a good question.
Absolutely. And the funds would be dispersed on a reimbursable basis upon receipt and approval of quarterly activity and financial reports. So this is important because we never give the whole amount up front. And the standard practice for the U.S. government with grant awards is to reserve at least 10% of the grant until the conclusion of the grant. So the organization may be able to get some funds in advance of activity in order to fund those, but the final award amount will never come through until the end. So there needs to be good budget planning throughout the process.
Right. And the final reports, when the final reports are received. So yeah.
And here's another question. What is the attachment file size? Is there a limit or a maximum?
Yes. So read the Federal Award Making Agency's application instructions for the file size limit for each grant application package you submit. Grants.gov suggests limiting the file size of the entire grant application package, including all the attachments, to 200 MB. So try to, reduce the size of your grant application package.
And as someone who has read applications, we encourage people to submit robust proposals that convey their entire idea, but on as few pages as possible.
Our next question is, what sort of funding is this?
So this is a good general question, and this one we received in advance, I think, to the ad that we showed for this program. And the answer is it's a public diplomacy funding opportunity through the State Department. And as mentioned before, but we'll take the opportunity to mention again, this program will strengthen people-to-people ties. It will build the capacity of local civil society partners. It's going to expand media outreach and counter violent extremism, because these are the goals of our public affairs programming. It will also include exchanges of people and mutual values with both Americans and Pakistanis participating.
Right.
So can you describe the criteria for partnering with the U.S. Embassy?
So the criteria is clearly mentioned on the Nofo. If the interested applicants see page 7 of the Nofo, they'll be able to see the eligibility information. So the next question is priority given to certain groups? Is it possible for grassroots level organizations to have priority? Or do they have an edge? So
we want to make sure this is a very clear answer, and that we give all completed applications equal importance, because we want to be fair and transparent in the manner in which grant applications are reviewed. So the applications do have to meet all the requirements. So they will have demonstrated past experience in the area in which they are planning to work. They will demonstrate that they have the expertise and the personnel who are available and credible to complete that work, and they will include all of the required paperwork. If they have all of those elements, then they will be considered a complete application, and they will be given due and fair review, equal review, to all such completed applications.
Do you want to take some more questions, Mo?
So we'll leave this slide up on resources for just a little while, but we do have a couple of questions from our audience. So from Arsalan Munir, he asks, is funding $200,000 to $500,000 for the month, the year, or the whole project? And is that fund extendable? And the answer is the $200,000 floor to the $500,000 ceiling is for the duration of the project. And as indicated in the Nofo, the maximum length of the project is 2 years. Now, the more difficult question is that fund extendable? Do you want to start with that one, Francis?
So, I mean, it totally depends on our budget. So, I mean, we can't promise anything at the moment since our budgets are, published each year. So this is for the entire project up to 2 years. No extensions or options years are planned at the moment.
And everything that would be considered would be at the discretion of the Public Affairs section. So while it is possible for grantees to have additional funds provided or additional time provided, that is always at the discretion of the grants officer who oversees that grant project and the relationship with the grantee. And there is definitely no guarantee of any such extension. And so we have another question, this time from Dylan Ox, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, who asks, if DUNS number, NCAGE, IDN, and the employer identification numbers are available, does each department of the university need to have a separate username and password, or should they be provided to all other departments applying for grants this year?
So, I mean, they should have a separate username and password for each of the system, and there should be one primary staff member from the university who could manage the systems. So,
right, meaning that there should only be one user account per organization.
Yeah.
And even we were checking some of the FAQs on some of these websites earlier. It's possible for multiple organizations to be registered to the same address. For example, if you were using some kind of incubation hub, you could use the same address and be two separate organizations. But each organization should have only one of these identification numbers, unique to that organization.
So there's a question from Abid Lajari who's asking about any helpful tips about getting a DUNS number. So it's clearly mentioned in the Nofo. If you go to Nofo, you'll be able to see the guidelines and the step-by-step procedures to apply for a DUNS and NCAGE number. Also, if you go to their websites, you will be able to get more details and more instructions, and even you can contact their help desk if you have any specific questions.
And if you go to slide 5 from this presentation, when it's available offline, you'll be able to see that website address. I will read it to you now. It's http://fedgov.dnb.com/webform. And thank you to our tech support for pulling the slide up while I was speaking. That's amazing.
Yeah. So that can be answered by only the university. Okay, so any more questions?
So while we're waiting for more questions from our audience, let's see if we can go back to our resources page, which shows grants.gov, which of course has the online user guide. And if you're patient, you can find almost all of the answers to every question you can imagine on that website.
Right.
Including the registration, the login, the search instructions, frequently asked questions, and background information about how the U.S. government provides these resources and why.
So the point of contact for queries on this Nofo is our colleague who's based in D.C., Alan Delage. Her email address is provided in the Nofo. If you have any specific questions related to the Nofo, you can reach out to her and she'll be able to answer your questions.
Exactly. And Ellen is the appointed point of contact for this Nofo. While we are able to provide some answers to you during this web chat, because this web chat will be made available through grants.gov, in all other circumstances, Ellen is the only one who can answer specific questions about this Nofo.
Right. Right.
So before we close, we do have another question, this one from Zija Fazli, who asks, can we hit multiple project areas in one proposal from the 4 listed in the Nofo? So this goes back to what we spoke about a little bit earlier. It is definitely possible to have a cross-cutting proposal, Zija. However, you need to direct the thrust of the proposal toward one objective. There could be elements of the other objectives, but one should be the clear primary focus.
Right. And in addition to that, we have also supplied an application summary cover sheet which clearly reflects all of the thematic areas of this Nofo. So each applicant must select one thematic area from that in that summary cover sheet. So yeah, that helps the grants committee to review it and measure its credibility.
And one point of note, in general, the proposals will be competing against one another in the category for which they are identified. So if the program proposal is identified as being principally an education proposal, it will be competing against other education proposals, whereas if it's identified as being a cultural heritage proposal, it will compete against other cultural heritage proposals. So you want to be sure to identify your area of primary interest correctly so that it's competing against others in the same category, because the committees will be evaluating those proposals for their qualities in that primary area of interest.
So we've received a question from Mohsin Kazmi, and he asks about, do you have a minimum time period for the project?
And the answer is that there's no strict minimum. In general, we find that projects take about a year to implement, but time, of course, varies depending on the nature of the program being proposed. We have seen some that take a long time to plan, but the actual program period can be somewhat brief. We've seen others that can be implemented slowly over a very long time. It depends on the nature of the program. If you're running a very large series of conferences, but only 3 conferences, for example, it may take some time to prepare each of them, but the time to actually conduct the conferences may be very short. If, for example, you were doing a training program for students or entrepreneurs, that training program itself could take a year. So it might take you almost 2 years between the preparation, the actual program itself, and then more time to close out that program. It really just depends.
Right.
So with that, we want to say thank you to our audience for participating in this web chat. It was great to join you on Facebook Live, and we wish you the best of luck with your proposals.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Have a great afternoon.
Yeah.